what was this all about? What have we done all of these years? And one of the two began to say, well, you know, one of my regrets is that I did not spend more time with my family, more time with my friends, more time doing the things that I enjoy. And another one said something that was really rang off all kinds of bells in my head. And he said this, and this guy was a practicing Christian. He says, you know, I go to church every Sunday. I go to Bible studies and all of this. And he says, then I would go to work on Monday. And what went on during the work week from Monday to Friday had very little, if anything, to do with what I heard on Sunday or in the Bible studies. So that was the basic conversation. And as I reflected on this, and this then became the genesis of my book and also the genesis of this particular series on mysticism, what I began to think about was this. You know, what does it mean to be holy? What does it mean to grow in the spiritual life? And it suddenly struck me that when we talk about holiness, we talk about prayer, we talk about spirituality, we have never really sufficiently developed a way of living the spiritual life, a path to holiness in the midst of the world, in the midst of the marketplace. So as a result, very often when we talk about spirituality, we talk about mysticism, we think of monks in monasteries and hermits in hermitages and nuns in cloisters. And I'm not saying that spirituality doesn't happen there. However, I assure you that we make a grave mistake if you think that just because you live in a monastery, a convent, or a hermitage, that in fact you're growing in the spiritual life, that in fact you are holy. In fact, that is not true. Also, I would say this. When we start talking about saints and what does it mean to be a saint, we immediately talk about canonized saints. And, you know, I'm not against canonized saints. However, what I want to say very clearly, many of the people whom I consider to be saints will never be canonized. And in fact, when we talk about what a saint is, one of the definitions that I really like very much is that saints are sinners who kept on trying. Saints were sinners who kept on trying. And in fact, one of the things I have come to appreciate, and one of the ways that I have experienced holiness, is in the brokenness of others, and in my own brokenness, in the struggles of life. That's where holiness happens. And so, getting back to the conversation that I heard on the train, what saddened me is that, in fact, I think sometimes when we talk about what it means to be holy and what it means to be spiritual, it becomes this somewhat plastic or out of reach kind of thing. And what I'm suggesting is that becoming holy is the opposite. Becoming holy, becoming spiritual, and this mystical path is about living life in the ordinary, because God dwells in the midst of the ordinary. So it's really finding God's presence, God's grace, and God's love in the midst of the ordinary events of everyday life. Now, it was the Second Vatican Council that really shifted our understanding of what it means to be holy. Second Vatican Council began to discuss holiness in the context of the religious life. And in the midst of the discussion and the conversation that took place at the council, there were those council fathers who said, no, wait, there's something wrong with this. And they shifted the conversation on holiness into the document on the church, that document we call Lumen Gentium. Now, I feel this was the watershed moment at the council. And what was said in that document was this, and I